How about you?
Hi, I work with Persis and Hasty at the center. I forgot, was there a question I was supposed to answer, or are we just introducing ourselves?
You can just introduce yourself. We're being casual.
Okay, well, yeah, hello.
Long time no see.
Yeah, good to see you. Looking good.
Thank you.
And Hasty works also at the center. So Nick and Hasty are, do you want to say anything about yourself, Hasty?
Um, sure, yeah. I'm a writer. I'm gonna wow, intros are hard. Uh yeah, I'm glad I'm really happy to be here with all of you.
Okay. Welcome everybody to our Pride Month event. And it's not the last, but kind of in the last weeks of the existence of the center. And we really wanted to do something to acknowledge and celebrate Pride Month because some of you know we've tried very hard throughout the existence of the center to shine a spotlight on members of our queer community, our trans community, and to really make people feel included and seen in this space. And Adib's been with us a few times for past events. So when I first thought of this, I was like, oh, it would be so fitting to make sure Adib was part of the, center's closing out month. And then he recommended that we invite Naseem, who was featured once on our Instagram, but this is the first time that we're engaging them in this event. So I'm going to read their bios quickly, and then I'm going to ask them to talk a little bit about their work briefly and read a sample of their work. And then we have sort of a conversation. And since it's small and intimate, we will invite you to participate if you feel so moved. So welcome everybody. And this event's being recorded because we're trying to chronicle all the events that we've done on our YouTube channel and have a record of what we've been about so that others who might follow us might recognize that building communities takes a lot of time and energy, but more importantly, it takes a spirit of inclusion and thoughtfulness and kindness. And I'm really so happy that one of the things that we will leave as a mark of our time is a recognition of gay, trans, queer people who are a part of the Iranian diaspora, because it wasn't always that way. So thank you all for being here. So let me start by introducing Adib first, and then Naseem, who will lead us out with the first part of the program. Adib Khorram is the queer Iranian American author of the award-winning and best-selling fiction for all ages. His debut novel, Darius the Great Is Not Okay, won the William C. Morris Award, the Asian Pacific American Literature Award, a Boston Globe Horn Book Honor, and was named Time Magazine's 100 Best YA Novels of All Time. His other YA novels include Darius the Great Deserves Better, Kiss and Tell, The Breakup List, and the forthcoming One Word, Six Letters, of which you can see the cover on his Instagram. He's also the author of the picture books Seven Special Somethings, A Nowruz Story, Bijan Always Wins, and the forthcoming Tea is Love, and the adult novel I'll Have What He's Having, as well as the forthcoming It Had to Be Him. There's a lot of forthcomings, Adib. He's a MacDowell Fellow and serves on the National Board of Authors Against Book Bans, and he lives in Kansas City, Missouri, where he drinks too much tea. And former neuroscientist, Astounding Award nominated, and Judith A. Markowitz Award winning author Naseem Jamnia, they, them, writes inclusive speculative fiction for kids, teens, and adults. Their fantasy novella, The Bruising of Gilwa, was a finalist for the IAFA Crawford Locus and World Fantasy Awards. Their middle grade horror debut, The Glade, releases in May 2025. So that just happened. Congratulations. And they've also contributed to the YA BIPOC horror anthology, The White Guy Dies First, 13 Scary Stories of Fear and Power, and the upcoming science fiction anthology, 100 Iran plus 100 Stories from a Century After the Coup. Naseem has been a Bitch Media, Lambda Literary, Otherwise, and the inaugural Samuel R. Delaney Fellow, and is part of the steering committee of Freedom to Read Nevada and the Nevada chapter co-lead for Authors Against Book Bans. A Persian Chicagoan and a child of Iranian immigrants, Naseem lives outside Reno, Nevada with their geologist husband and 4 furred creatures. And I want to say that I was so happy about this combo because I also want to talk about book bans, because that is one big part of the landscape of queer literature right now and seems to be only getting worse. So welcome to you both. Thank you. And Naseem, please start us off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us, for having me. I am very sad that this is closing out the center, but like who was it? Yeah, Georgina in the chat mentioned, I'm looking forward to kind of perusing the digital archives. Not to belabor the point, I write stuff. My middle grade horror debut, The Glade, just came out, which is very exciting. I was going to read from that, but instead I'm actually going to read a nonfiction, the nonfiction afterwards of my debut, The Bruising of Kilwa, because I think it's related to the conversations we're going to have about what it means to be marginalized and what it means to be Iranian in the United States. So it's pretty short. I'm going to read that. When I was a child, my father instilled a fierce pride in our heritage in me. The Persians, he told me, had one of the largest empires in the world, spanning through centuries and millennia. We came from those folks, as both of my parents immigrated to the United States from Iran. To be Persian was to embrace this legacy of empire with pride, because despite everyone who tried to wipe us out, the Muslim Arabs, the Mongols, the British, and the French, and the Russians, we are still here. It did not occur to me to be ashamed until my second master's program, when I sat in a post-colonial literature class and realized I was living the legacy of empire in my daily life. Having been born and raised and now studying on stolen land, with a professor whose family had been caught in India's partition, and being one of the few people of color in the department. All of these and more made me realize the empire I had long admired could not be divorced from these modern contexts either, despite their seeming dissimilarities. It didn't matter that Persepolis was not built by African slaves. Many Black Iranians are a legacy of the other dynasties that used them. It didn't matter that Persians had invented algebra or been the founders of modern medicine or had written one of the longest epics in world literature. What did such accomplishments mean when we were still subjugating people under our care? But what did it also mean that while we had once been an empire, we were now a hated people? After the Muslim conquest of Iran, the majority of the country converted for fear of subjugation and violence. Those that did not, despite the persecution, hid their native Zoroastrian practices, a tradition stretching back to the time of Cyrus the Great. And those who could not hide or convert fled to India to become modern Parsis. Farsi as a language was almost wiped out in place of Arabic, until Abu Qasim Ferdowsi penned the Persian Book of Kings, the Shahnameh, an epic of about 50,000 couplets, over double the length of the Iliad and Odyssey combined. Fast forward to the 19th century, where countries like Russia and France and England set their sights on the oil-rich country of Iran. Fast forward to the 20th, where the United States feared a socialist democracy in Iran spelled doom for their foreign interest and sent the CIA to help instigate a coup. Fast forward to 2016, when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States and a ban against Muslim-majority countries was instated, and just reinstated. Fast forward to 2021, where US Senator Susan Collins, in response to the storming of the White House, wrote in an op-ed for the Bangor Daily News, "My first thought was that the Iranians had followed through on their threat to strike the Capitol." What does it mean to be oppressed when you were once an oppressor? I did not initially set out to write The Bruising of Kilwa to explore these issues. Initially, I was trying to use my background as a scientist to learn how to write a short story, intending it to be a medical fantasy. But as Firuz began unraveling the mystery of the blood bruising, so too did they have to contend with their role as a Sasanian in Kilwa. I had initially designed the Queendom of Dilmun, the country which Firuz called home for most of their life, as an allegory for the Muslim conquest of Iran, but with the idea of what Iran might have looked like if the invaders had never been expelled. Since then, as all stories do, these countries and peoples have morphed to become their own, but I continue to pose myself the question I still do not have an answer for. What does it mean that today, the people from whom my parents come from are vilified and hated in the country in which we live, but once, however long ago, these same people subjugated others? Firuz is not a hero, and Redacted is not a villain. Their ideological clash ends in violence, as so many often do. But Firuz does not come away with the triumphant knowledge that they have won. They didn't win. As they began the story, so they conclude it, a marginalized person in a country afraid of its own recolonization. As a multi-marginalized person in the United States, I think a lot about this country's treatment of the other and the ways in which this country was built on the backs of those very people. And though I can trace the historical, social, and cultural factors from which many of today's issues stem, I come back again to the same fear of the other, a fear of resource loss, of morality loss, of dignity loss. An actual rather than imagined reality for so many people who live in this country today, including over 11 million undocumented immigrants, and so many more who are willing to feel that ostracism in the hopes of achieving a different and better future for their families. While I only touched on some of these issues in The Bruising of Kilwa, I hope it will inspire a conversation about all the ways in which individuals can put aside their judgments and join migrants and other marginalized people to create a brighter tomorrow, rather than perpetuate a nation's fear of drowning under the depth of a short but fraught history. And I hope this story can inspire a little more nuance in these conversations too. Thank you.
That was amazing. Well, my reading's going to look like shit now. Um,
No, now
I
you
have
can
a Bachelor of
uplift
Arts
us.
in theatrical lighting design. Like, I do not have that kind of bona fides. Um, Hi everyone, I'm Adib Khorram, a chaos child, a theater kid. I've been writing fiction of the Iranian diaspora since, well, I've been publishing it since 2018, and I've been writing it since 2015, when I saw the growing We Need Diverse Books movement and asked myself why I had only written about straight white people before, and then decided to write about queer Iranians instead. My first book was Darius the Great is Not Okay back in 2018, and I have since been writing for all ages. I think I first connected with the center during the pandemic and the virtual communities, which, in one of the few good things it has ever done, Instagram's algorithm fed it to me because it could tell that I was Iranian. And I'm always grateful for that one single shining moment of algorithmic acuity. And I've been as engaged as I could be from afar ever since. And I'm heartbroken that the center is closing, but I'm so grateful for the work it's done for the community it's built and will continue to foster in the years to come. And I think with community in mind, I'm going to share a bit of a chapter from my first novel for adults, I'll Have What He's Having, which is a queer romance starring an Iranian American man. And this scene is set at Farzan, the main character, his parents' Persian restaurant in Kansas City, Missouri, where he and his friends gather once a week to complain about their dating lives, as sort of an example of the community that the center has fostered, and that I think queer people and Iranian people and queer Iranian people foster amongst ourselves. And then, Farzan said dramatically, dipping his bread in the bowl of a mustamusir, a dip of tangy yogurt and salty shallots. And then he was like, if you want to hook up again, we can. And I didn't know what to say. It was too early, and I thought we'd had a really nice night, and he was acting all weird. So I'm just standing there, naked, while he gets dressed and leaves. Across the table, Ramin pressed his lips together, probably holding in a chuckle. Farzan's best friend was lighter-skinned, like a peeled almond, with bright green eyes, a large Iranian nose, and dimples that Farzan would have been jealous of if Ramin was a stranger instead of a brother in all but name. He kept his black hair short and parted on the right, sharp and professional. That sounds like something out of a movie. Yeah, forgetting Sarah Marshall, Arya said. Kristen Bell broke up with Jason Segel while he stood there totally nude, thinking they were going to have sex. Farzan's other best friend was even darker skinned than Farzan, though his tended more toward a warm, ruddy copper. He had thick eyebrows, a long, thin nose, dark brown eyes, and no hair at all. After going bald during college, he'd taken to shaving his head. He was rail thin, unlike Farzan, who was a little on the stocky side, or Ramin, who'd fluctuated over the years between fat and thin, but had finally, with the help of his therapist, found a healthy weight for himself. And, more importantly, a healthy body image. Still, Farzan caught Arya sliding an extra piece of bread onto Ramin's plate, and Ramin nodding a silent thanks. So after all that, he just bounced. Arya's metallic teal nail polish caught the light as he swirled his wine, a cheap Washington cab Farzan had convinced his parents to add to the wine list, because it was good bang for the buck and paired well with most everything on the menu. Yup, Farzan sipped his own glass. Mushta Musir was one of the few things the cab didn't go with. Too much acidity in the wine versus too tangy a yogurt. But all wines could be drunk with all foods, unless you were a wine snob. Or even just an expert, like David, who'd been knowledgeable but not the least bit snobbish. Not to mention handsome and a great cuddler, and he did this thing with his tongue where... I don't blame you, though, Ramin said, shaking Farzan out of his horny reverie. If you're not looking for casual, better to tell him that, before either of you gets hurt. Especially after what happened last time. Ugh, don't remind me. The last time Farzan had tried doing the casual thing, a couple years ago now, he'd ended up with a broken heart and a round of antibiotics. Counterpoint, Hector was a lying asshole. Arya set down his wineglass and templed his fingers, leaning in to look Farzan in the eye. But this guy doesn't sound like one. If the dick was good, you could have had a few more hookups before you canceled your subscription. At the table to the left, an older Iranian gentleman began coughing on his rice while his neighbor patted his back. Farzan recognized both of them, part of the crowd of older men who came in at least twice a month, sometimes only 4 and sometimes as many as 12. They'd take over some tables in the corner right at the opening, eat and play Uruk, and go through pots of tea and plate after plate of appetizers. Farzan once asked his dad why he let them keep coming back when they took up so many tables but never ordered that much. Firuz had just said, "If I tell them to go away, who will I play cards with when I retire?" Which was a fair point, except Farzan wasn't certain either of his parents would ever retire. I'm gonna pause there.
I love this book and I can't wait for the sequel.
Oh, remind me after. I'll send you. Well, remind me when I get back to Kansas City, and I'll mail you a copy.
Yes. I already pre-ordered, but I'll take it.
Excellent.
I always pre-order your stuff.
Oh, thank you. Fine, same, obviously. You have to support all the other Iranian authors except for that one that I don't like, but I'm not going to mention who.
We'll talk
No one
later.
here, obviously. We will talk later. Oh, Persis, you're muted.
Thank you both for reading and for introducing your work, Naseem, to us. I wonder if we could just maybe move to talking a little bit about what it has meant to you to be a writer, to identify your work with being queer and Iranian, and also in the case of both of you, thinking a little bit about who your audience both has been in the past and who you want the audience to be in the future. So I think for those who don't know either one of you, it might be nice if you talk a little bit about your own process of writing, the obstacles you've faced, and what has helped you break through those challenges. And I just want to note, Adib, that hearing a passage about a very direct sexual encounter is refreshing and probably new to lots of people
and a lot of Iranians, I think.
Out of Iranians. Yeah. So I'll start with you, Adib.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, I guess, my evolution as a writer, as someone who never planned to be a writer in the first place. I started writing for young readers, young adult fiction, and I felt really strongly about my place there, and was in some ways very selfishly writing for kind of the teenager I had been. But as I talked to more and more young readers, found that not only were Iranians resonating with my work, and not only were queer people resonating with my work, but more broadly, people of diaspora, no matter what diaspora they came from, would come up to me and say, "Oh, you know, Mamu, Darius's grandmother, reminded me so much of my own grandmother back in Ecuador or back in China or wherever their family came from." They would say um, they could relate to those feelings of not quite belonging anywhere, and knowing the place and perhaps knowing that the place where they were supposed to belong doesn't really exist anymore, which is, I think, a thing very particular to being Iranian, but not unique to Iranians. Western interventionism has ruined many a country, not just Iran, but certainly I think for Iranians, the pain is still very acute since the generation that saw their country and their dreams taken away is still with us. And as I started to write for more age ranges, first branching out into picture books, my first picture book was about Nowruz, and I had lots of uh, Iranian or just Nowruz celebrating parents appreciative. But it also had a very cute cat in it, and so I also just had lots of cat lovers talking about the book, and I think curious people connected with that book and said, "Oh, I went and learned about Nowruz, and it sounds like a beautiful celebration." Or they would read Darius and say, "All the food in it sounds so great. I went and looked up an Iranian restaurant in my city, and I had the best time of my life there." Um, and and then with kind of moving into the adult space, it's been interesting to write about people my age, and then with an intended readership of people my age. And yeah, as you say, Iranians don't often talk about sex, and many Iranians don't talk about queerness in general either. And I think I'm nothing if not willing to force an awkward conversation, which I actually also think is a very Iranian trait, because who doesn't have that one? Who doesn't have that one relative that will ask you an impertinent question because they want some pertinent information? And uh, and it's been really rewarding. I think, I'm visiting my family in Vancouver right now, which is where most of them moved after the revolution. And a few years ago, when on a different visit, my ame said to me, "I've been Canadian longer than I ever was Iranian." And I think, our diaspora is constantly evolving, and I do not think sort of the baseline attitude toward queer people in the diaspora is the same as it was 20 years ago, nor is it the same as the attitude toward queer people in sort of mainstream Iranian culture back in Iran. And I think, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I think I have one more point I want to make, which is that a few months ago I got to see English on Broadway. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but it's a Pulitzer-winning play by Iranian playwright. And I got to go on one of the nights when there was a talk back with the audience, and one of the members of the audience was a much more recent Iranian immigrant, and basically challenged the play for sort of a false depiction of Iran. And it brought home to me that when you became part of a diaspora affects the lens through which you view that diaspora, and the frame of reference that you have for your country of origin shifts. And I think those of us who perhaps are further removed have become more comfortable with queerness than those who are more recently removed. And I hope that trend of acceptance will continue and increase, because I think it's important and necessary. Thank you. I hope that made any sort of sense.
It did to me. I was nodding and jotting things down because one of the when you mentioned your Amma saying that she's been in Vancouver longer than or in Canada longer than in Iran, I thought about my dad, who I mean, my parents recently moved to Massachusetts, but they moved last year. But if you asked him early last year, where are you from? He'd say Wisconsin, which I took personal offense to because they were in Chicago longer than they were in Wisconsin. But
But the cheese will always tell.
yeah, I mean, it's good cheese. I can't lie.
In
So
your blood.
I always found it very interesting that my parents have this interesting relationship to Iran that has passed to me that is very much based in their own diasporic experience. My dad came here before the revolution when he was 16, a couple of years before he came for college. And so he got to avoid the unrest of the revolution and of the Iran-Iraq war. He was in America. He wasn't conscripted. My mom came after the revolution, also for college. She was like 21, I think, but her father was the chief of police in Abadan when the fire at Cinema Rex happened.
Wow.
Which is kind of our big family, like, I mean, my mom's had a lot of trauma, but that's the one that I keep coming back to and really thinking about, because what does it mean to have a, I asked my grandfather about that that night, and I recorded him before he died, telling me about kind of what it meant to be a cop. And, I have not positive feeling towards police, but I loved my grandfather. And this tragedy that kickstarted the revolution, and obviously there had been build toward the revolution. It wasn't the cause of, but it certainly was the spark that lit the flame, the fuse. So I think about that a lot. I think about the freezing of culture that happens when you are a child of immigrants, and what happens if those immigrants don't have close ties to Iran. Most of my parents have extended relatives in Iran, but they haven't been back since they left. My mom's a political refugee, and my dad has zero interest in going back. And my grandparents came here, my aunts came here. We have a pretty small family unit, and I was raised inside a Sufi center. So my understanding of Iranian culture is very much tied to kind of this greatness of our art and our music and our poetry through this Sufi lens. And I have less of an understanding of like what it means to be Iranian, especially given my parents' history. So how does that relate to my writing? Since that had nothing to do with writing. It kind of has everything to do with my writing, to be honest. It's what I have been thinking so much about in the past, let's say 5 years or so. So The Bruising of Kilwa came out in 2022, but I started writing as a kid. And yeah, I mean, I remember when Darius the Great came out, and it was one of the first books I had seen with a YA protagonist that was Iranian. Until then, I think it was just If You'd Be Mine that I had read. I think.
Yes. Oh, I love
Yeah,
that.
that was the only one I'd seen. And before that, the first time I'd seen an Iranian in a book was in Persepolis, and that was the first time I felt like I'd seen myself in a book. And I was 21 at the time. So it was really kind of this understanding of and trying to reconnect to what it means to be Persian and what it therefore means to be Iranian, especially in the wake of, Gina Amini's murder. What does that kind of mean as somebody who's never been to Iran, as somebody who's desperately would want to go to Iran, and also knows that I wouldn't be safe there right now as like an openly trans person. Even if I tried to pass, you just have to Google me and it's just like, oh, very gay. So yeah, certainly every time an Iranian reader has found Kilwa, and I'm bringing up Kilwa specifically because The Glade has only been out for about 2 weeks. They've reached out to me and especially queer Iranian readers have been like, thank you for writing a fantasy world that is centered not in Europe, but in Iran and in kind of West Asia more broadly. And mostly it's a lot of queer readers who will reach out to me, and a lot of trans readers in particular, because it's also a transnormative world. And my hope is that I really want to write toward Iranian readers and queer Iranian readers in the diaspora, because that's where I'm drawing from every time I put pen to page. So I have no idea if that answered any of the question.
It was a nice riff off of Adib, and yes, it did answer a lot. Maybe you could, I'm less experienced, Naseem, with both speculative fiction and what did you call your novel? Futuristic? No.
Queer normative.
Yeah. What does that entail for a reader to encounter that kind of a world and for you to write it? Because it's a real act of imagination, right?
Yeah, so speculative fiction very broadly encompasses fantasy, science fiction, horror, slipstream, magical realism, kind of et cetera. You can expand out. And a lot of people, especially right now, are putting some sort of speculative element in our real world. And what I really wanted to do, and there's there's things you can explore with that for sure, and there's stories you can tell. And certainly the Glade is set in our world. My middle grade, it's set in Minnesota, but it's a horror. What I really strongly believe for fantasy in particular is that we have, especially if you're creating a whole new world, what we call a secondary world, you are making choices about what from our world to input into that world. And so when we typically think of fantasy as like the Game of Thrones Westeros world, because like European style, filled most, this, and I should say an imagined medieval European style, right? This imaginary of Western Europe being just white, of having kind of certain patriarchal norms, which of course were the case, but it's more complicated than that, particularly for women who could acquire property in some cases in medieval times. But there's, in fantasy, we have the opportunity to rebuild the world from scratch, right? We don't have to have the same things in whatever world we're making. And if we do so, regardless of it, it's a choice. Sometimes that choice is unintentional, but it's a choice nonetheless. And so one of the things I really tried to do for the world of Kilwa, which is a world I hopefully will get to publish more, and I've written other stories in it, was think about what kinds of issues do I want to explore and what do I want to be baseline assumption. And so queer normativity means that everybody that rather than kind of assuming people are straight, people are cisgender, everybody is assumed queer. And the way that it plays out is that people introduce themselves with their pronouns. People don't make assumptions about what gender your partner may be. There is no forcing of what certain family dynamics should look like. And I'm hoping to explore more of that. And that's not to say that there isn't difficulties that might be associated with being queer. For example, if two people with uteruses want to have a biological child, the magic that's involved in that is very invasive, because I can just use magic for that. That's part of the nice thing about having a fantasy. And the main character, or the main character's brother in The Bruising of Kilwa, is trans and is unable to access gender affirming care because they're migrants and because it's expensive, and the medical procedure that's non-magical is inaccessible to them. And the magical procedure, the main character, who is a doctor, does not feel equipped to do. So there's still that stress. What I really wanted to explore is this dichotomy of we were once empire, we are now refugee, in a way that thought through, like I'm Muslim. I was raised Muslim. Like I mentioned, I was raised inside a Sufi center. And so I was grappling a lot with, I'm only Muslim because of a form of colonization. And while I make the choice to remain Muslim, I have to contend with that history. And also, we were colonized after we had been done the colonizing. And you cannot talk about European colonization, you cannot talk about the British Empire without tracing back to Rome, without tracing back to Persia. So this is a long, really rambly way of saying that secondary worlds doesn't have to be like free of oppression or free of difficulties, but whatever we create has to be purposeful, because that's what allows us to imagine new possibilities.
Thank you. That's great. So I wonder if you two can talk a little bit about, I mean, I know more about, you both have won awards, and I have to be honest with you, I've read more of Adib's work, Naseem, than yours.
He's got a lot of work out there, so understandable.
Yeah. How's your work been received, both in some of the overlapping context in which you yourself reside, Iranian, queer, diaspora, and what are some of the things that you have learned from your readers that you think is particularly important for you as a writer? And I'll let either one of you decide who wants to go first.
Oh, I will go first, even though I'm ill-equipped, so that Naseem has a chance to catch their breath. Sorry, and then I immediately blanked. Can you restate this question for me? Oh my gosh, so embarrassing.
Basically, I was, there's a lot
Oh,
of,
how was my work received? Okay, it's
yeah,
back
how
now.
was it
Sorry.
received, and what are some of the things that you might have been surprised by, or that you didn't expect?
Yes, sorry, thank you. I just had a complete brain fart there. Um, there's ghormeh sabzi cooking downstairs, and it just started wafting under my closed door, and so the scent is very distracting. I have been lucky in that my book has been, especially my debut novel, was very well received, um, both in the Iranian diaspora community and sort of in the literary community. Um, Publishing, especially publishing for children, tends to be divided into sort of two distinct ecosystems. One being a commercial ecosystem focused on bookstore sales, and a second ecosystem being focused on school and library sales. And Darius the Great is Not Okay was a very school and library book. And those are the books that tend to win awards and get assigned sort of to school curriculums. And I didn't write it intentionally, but it just ended up being that kind of story. It was a story about personal growth, about friendship, and with lots of things that come up in school curricula that you could point to the book and say, oh, we're talking about, geography. Here's places in Iran that are part of geography, or here's part of Iranian history that we study in our world history class, or here's an example of a motif. Apparently, I have motifs in my books. Who knew? That an English teacher can make people write essays on. And so it was really interesting to see, frankly, a lot of white people be really excited for this book about a queer Iranian going to Iran for the first time. And it startled and astounded me, because I was in high school when the September 11th attacks happened. I remembered being part of the axis of evil all through my college years. I remember performing whiteness as best I could to survive in a lot of contexts. And, what a difference 17 years made, that all these white people were excited about a book set in Iran. And then to the number of Iranian people who found their name or a relative's name on one of the characters in my book, that saw a familiar food mentioned, that recognized tarof and are like, oh, I know what this is because this is for me. Like, that was really magical. It was a feeling I had when I was reading Naseem's book, and one of the main characters is named Afsane, which is my sister's name, which I'd never seen my sister's name in a book before, and that was its own very particular kind of magic for me. I think, I talk about this book a lot, and I know anyone involved in diaspora studies is familiar with Neda Maghboule's The Limits of Whiteness. And, Iranians as a community had spent a long time performing whiteness, as I had. And in a way, writing fiction of the Iranian diaspora feels like giving all of us permission to take up our own space and to celebrate who we are, and in a way, hopefully let go of aspirations to whiteness. And so that's been really, that's been one of the most meaningful things I think about the work that I've done. I hope that answers the question.
Dang, how am I supposed to follow that up?
Easily. You're much smarter than me, and you already know this about yourself.
This is not true.
I'm a theater child.
I wish I was a theater child. I never found out how I could audition. Yeah, it's, the whiteness thing. I think about that. Like, I think about the fact that my dad still jokes that, like, we're the true Aryans.
You're like, Dad, don't use that word anymore.
I mean, and the fact that he was here during the hostage crisis, like, he offhand told me, oh yeah, like they couldn't tell me and my Arab friend apart, but we stayed up with guns. And I was like, whoa, can we slow down the fact that you were 18 years old and you were afraid for your lives? That you stayed up all night with guns in case someone came after you? I mean, just like, I think a lot of trauma related to being, and this is probably true of many immigrants, but trauma related to Iranianness is swept under the rug. We're not a culture that's great about talking through those kinds of feelings, for all that we are such a culture that loves expressing love. The idea of like, well, when things get complicated, it's like, okay, maybe we need to back away from this. This is an uncomfortable conversation. So yeah. Also, my dad's name is Muhammad Ali. So this is, one day I'll write an essay about not being white and the fact that my very obviously brown father still clings to this idea of Aryanness. Yeah, I've been very pleasantly surprised at Kilwa's reception because a lot of people find it novel. Because fantasy has not been asking the questions that Kilwa had been asking. For me, it was just like, well, this is like one of my tamest fantasy books. I was just like the fantasy book that I first wrote in this universe still hasn't sold. We've been trying to sell it for a while, and I knew it was going to be a hard sell, and so I wrote Kilwa, and then was very pleasantly surprised that people responded so well, and they were like, here is like what fantasy could be doing. And what I took from that is that more marginalized people, especially those at the intersections, need to be writing speculative fiction, and particularly creating new worlds with speculative fiction. Because I think we can point to a lot of, again, stories set in our world that have some sort of magical or technological elements. Many fewer worlds that have been inspired by our experiences in our cultures. I've also been very pleasantly surprised at the number of people who are like, oh, you just like straight up put Persian words in the text, or like you just straight up imported our rituals. And I was like, yeah, I chose to name the Persianate people in the world Sasanians after our dynasty, and I decided that I was going to put the word Charshamba Suri, and I would figure out a world building reason for why jumping over a fire was going to be part of this culture. There's a section that I thought about reading and decided not to, but when the main character Firuz meets Afsone, who is this orphaned 14-year-old, and talks about Tarof, and I was thinking about like, how do I make this recognizably Persian and Iranian for readers? Because we don't get that very often. So many of our stories, particularly within the US publishing landscape, which is what I'm familiar with, is about the revolution. And that's great and necessary, right? Like, obviously there's a reason why we're still processing that story, but I don't want us to only ever have to write about the revolution and our pain. I don't only ever want to write about the complications of our own people oppressing our own people, because there's other stories we can tell, and those stories are important, and I'm not saying that they're not. Certainly I think one day there is a nonfiction in me that's going to be about my mother's family, but I want us to do more magic. I want us to be the great tech engineers of the future. And I think that's really what I hope at least Kilwa has accomplished, is the idea of like we can do more than just the revolution.
Thank you. Thank you, Naseem. I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thanks.
Um,
It's not for everyone. I always give that caveat because some fantasy readers are like, this is a very unusual fantasy. And I'm like, it is. It's a slice of life. It's about what it means to be a migrant in a hostile city on a daily basis, and healthcare burnout. That's the other thing it's about.
sounds painfully reminiscent of the reality we're living in.
I did not write it during COVID, but I was revising it during COVID. So I was thinking a lot about that.
I see. Okay, well, now I'm going to ask you a little bit about the current moment. And because, of course, one of the things that's so painful about this moment is the attempt to erase all these remarkable gains that we've made as a society in recognizing queer people, queer literature, and trans folks in particular on the front lines of those campaigns of abuse and erasure. So in light of that, why does your work feel maybe more important now than even when you first wrote it? And then I know both of you are active in challenging book bans, so I wonder if you could talk about that particular facet of attempts to erase as well. And I'll pitch it to you, Adib, since Naseem just spoke.
Although before you get going, can I just say there's a scene in I'll Have What He's Having where the love interest David has what he spits like his wine tasting in, and there's a picture of Ronald Reagan at the bottom. And I think about that all the time because we can really trace a lot of stuff back to Reagan. So please
I
continue.
mean, we really can. To quote John Oliver, Reagan did once do something good, and that's that in 2014 he died. Definitely the best thing he ever did for the world. Yeah, I there's a really there's sort of a glib, I think sometimes self-congratulatory refrain that a lot of authors will say, which is that all art is political, all writing is political. Um, and it's true, it is, and it's a start. But I do not think it is the be all end all that a lot of artists sometimes wish it was. Study after study shows that writing builds empathy, that reading stories about people different from you humanizes them. And if you see other people as human beings, you're less likely to, round them up with a gang of masked federal agents, remove them from the country without due process, and pat yourself on the back, and then anyway, uh, it's a weird time. Um, so I think recognizing the humanity of others is only the start, because at the end of the day, not everyone reads books. Um, there's a lots of low information people out there. There are lots of people who have very deep feelings and they let those feelings define their worldview, and they have never examined those feelings or where those feelings came from, and they never will. And so I see being a writer as only one part of how we need to be changing the world. We cannot reach everyone, but we can reach some people. And I think despite my pessimism occasionally, I think I actually am an optimist at heart. And I tell myself that for every person out there, there's some key to help them understand the world better, find their way back to kindness and compassion. And we just haven't found what that is yet. Um, and maybe I'm just being overly hopeful. And so I think part of being a writer is maybe holding that hope. Um, that when you're a writer, when you're an artist, you spend a lot of time with humanity, thinking about humanity, examining humanity. And I think it's important I think for me as a writer at least, and I hope others may feel this way, to not give up on humanity, even when I very desperately feel like doing so. Um, and then in this very particular moment, as you mentioned, Naseem and I both are involved with Authors Against Book Bans, which is a grassroots organization basically fighting for the freedom to read, and frankly for the freedom to create, which is also under threat, sometimes explicitly and sometimes implicitly in this country. And people often will, again, writers love to pat themselves on the back. Many writers will say that their writing is their activism. Um, and I perhaps might have said that in the past, but no, it turns out activism is activism and writing is writing. And being a member of an activist organization has taught me to be an activist in a way that I had not known how to be before. Um, it has taught me about like how I need to be engaging with legislators, how coalitions are formed, how, sorry, that was the dishes. Um, sorry, I can hear the kitchen from here. It has taught me how to find people I disagree with on 9 things, but agree with on one thing, and work together to make that one thing happen. And know that we'll have to hash out the other 9 things later. But if that one thing is important, we gotta put on our big boy pants, plug our noses, and work with them to make it happen. And that's been really hard, but rewarding. And so I'm, in a way, like doing that work has given me hope in a way that writing did not give me hope. And I feel like I'm definitely like rambling and petering out now, so I will discontinue talking.
I can actually build off of that because I super agree. I mean, I also was, when I first started publishing, one reason I left science is because Trump got elected. That's when I realized, the first time, I realized the change I wanted to make I couldn't do at the lab bench, not the way I thought I used to be able to. And so I started writing a lot of personal essays, and I was exploring my gender, and and that was what I was publishing. And for me at the time, this was over 10 years ago at this point, that's what I also thought was activism. It's just kind of like, our words are important. And there's not to say that it's not, right? Like, there is a post-colonial scholar, Veracini, who argues that if we don't write like future, stories that look past colonization, we can't imagine those stories. And so I really, writing and being able to imagine other things and to kind of think through the consequences of what we are living through is important. But I agree. I felt like it's such a slow change, and that kind of slow cultural change is important. It's valuable, but people are dying right now. And the sense of urgency it's hard not to get caught up in that, because good activist work is thinking long term and is not giving into every sense of urgency, but doing the work with Authors Against Book Bans. And in Reno, I was one of the founding members of Freedom to Read Nevada. And so those two play very nicely for each other for me. But I'm also learning these things, right? We're going to start trying to do some coalition building with other groups that care about libraries. I really want to start thinking about moving statewide, because we're only one part of the state, and the rural counties are the ones that are particularly being hit with book challenges, and also just having their libraries defunded, and having bad directors and having bad boards, and which is also happening in Washoe County. And it's hard. It's hard because it feels like you're never doing enough. I constantly think about the fact that Palestinians have been undergoing genocide for almost 80 years, but then has been particularly intensified over the past over a year and a half at this point. And I think about the fact that there are massacres happening in the Congo and in Sudan that I don't know anything about. And I think about the fact that, like, I found out that what was going on in LA over social media, right? I mean, it's kind of like there's continually stuff doing, and it feels deeply overwhelming, and you have to choose a place to start and to focus. And that might mean that other things are not going to get your attention, and that's life. I think that's being human, but it is very difficult once you start doing the work to be like, am I doing enough work? That's, like, I think the constant refrain that I keep asking myself as I keep realizing where seats of power and seats of change happen, and knowing that as much as I want to burn everything down and start over, because I think that I don't know if we can reform a system that's working exactly how it was meant to work. If I want change to happen, I have to think about these power structures in maybe a more nuanced way than I had been thinking about before, and I hate it. It's not a nice feeling. It's kind of a gross feeling, but it's what we can do right now.
Thank you. Okay, there was a person, Azine, wanted to ask a question, so I'm going to sort of segue into the Q&A portion and invite you all to engage with these two lovely people. And we'll do your reading at the end, okay, Adib and Naseem? So, Azine, please.
Yeah. I came in kind of late, and I'm right now getting a read on the room in terms of the format that was happening here. So I'm sorry I missed everything prior. I was in a different meeting, but
Never apologize for anything, especially your glasses, which are amazing. Where did you get them?
whatever Zizou, whatever the one online.
Okay, I need to look them up. They're amazing.
I've broken 3 pairs, and yeah, they're like $12. But thank you. and I came on here because I'm 57, I'm first gen, and it has been rough. And I've been an activist ever since 79, since I was 11, right? And it's this constant struggle of advocating for self. And that's led into working in the trans nonprofit industrial complex. And me saying all of that implies all the weight of burnout that I have. And I feel like I've gotten to a point where I need to write about it. I have so many friends who are doing great work at City Hall, and they're dealing with folks that trigger me. Like, straight up, like pink washing across the board. And they know I can't be there with a few state representatives and whatnot, that I just literally can't be in the same room with these folks. And I guess it's less of a question, more of a statement. I'm trying to segue or do a course correction in terms of how I want to show up with my voice. And it feels like this is what I want to do. um, it's just how to get from point A to point B. Um, Scott Wiener just pulled, I think he's got 4 bills right now that are making it so next semester there will be 0 Middle Eastern studies in California curriculum, which is fine. I have my own curriculum, so then it's just making me go, okay, well, I need to work on composition, and that's it.
I mean, Ozzy, one thing that I'm thinking of is your coming to writing is after a lifetime of doing activism and all that experience and that wealth of knowledge, and the fact that you're still showing up for the community. That's very, I think that's different than when we're young, and certainly I'll speak for myself here. When I was younger than I am now, it's, in my early 20s, it kind of felt like writing was the place to begin and begin and end, as Adib was saying earlier, and I think that people always will benefit from those who have done the work and are doing the work coming to the page. There's nothing that we can't learn from that.
I think I want to add, because there is a few books that resonate really deeply with me, and we're telling the same story, but when I write and I journal, it comes across really angsty and very, like, I know it, I'm gonna get a lot of people swiping left, and then I can read somebody else and it's so much more palatable. I don't want to lose my voice, but yet I still don't want people to put me down. And so I think that's what I'm looking for, is other examples of writers that know how to get past their own anxiety, angst, and calcified chip on their shoulder. Because it really is. It's an appendage.
I think, if everyone will forgive me for swearing,
Oh,
I
please.
think there is a point there is a point in everyone's writing life where you run out of fucks to give. And until you reach that point, it's really kind of stressful. And once you reach that point, you sort of identify who it is you're writing for. And most writers I know, it turns out that we're all just writing for ourselves. And I think if when you write for yourself, you realize that you are not alone, that lots of people are feeling the same feelings you're feeling, thinking the same thoughts you're thinking, and that by embracing that honesty and that authenticity, you will draw people in. You'll never draw everyone in. No one can. Even in like my most successful book, which was my debut novel, there are still people that hated it. In fact, there was the most unhinged, delightfully scathing 1-star review written by another Iranian American who basically said that everything in the book that I had written about the Iranian community was wrong and that I was wrong and I was a horrible person. And I was like, wow, like, jealous much? Like, clearly. And so I think you have to embrace who you are and what you have to say, uh, and know that there is value in it. And like, fuck the haters. And I think being part of the queer community and being part of the Iranian diaspora community, uh, we are lucky in a way, because the broader queer community as a whole, um, like, lost a significant part of a generation to the AIDS crisis. Um, but the diaspora didn't. A good portion of that same generation of Iranians managed to escape Iran after the revolution, and so we have a continuity of community in the Iranian diaspora and in the Iranian queer diaspora that I think gives us something really unique to offer the broader queer community of access to community wisdom, access to elders. Not that I'm accusing you of being an elder, but you said you've been, as you said, you've been doing this work since 1979, when you were a child, and there aren't a lot of white people that have been doing that work for the same duration of time, whether because they're white and they've never needed to, or because they didn't survive it. And I think that's something really magical and powerful that we have to offer. And I don't think you should ever I don't ever think you should underestimate how powerful that is, if that makes sense.
I don't think, yeah, to kind of follow up, I don't think palatability is necessarily the goal, although I hear you what you're saying, because especially when we write nonfiction, sometimes it feels like deeply self-indulgent. And sometimes it is, and like that's why I have a newsletter where half of the month I send really deeply self-indulgent personal essays. And the other half I'm like, here's actually a useful thing for people. And one thing that I always like to, I do a lot of teaching, and I always like to stress that like revision, like you don't have to, those first drafts are not necessarily going to be art, and they don't have to be. And depending on what your goals are for the writing, like if your goal is processing everything that you're doing or everything that you have done and making sense of your life and your trauma and your joys, then who cares if it feels self-indulgent? If the goal is to publish it, well, and it kind of becomes a different game. But also, I agree that the palatability doesn't necessarily, like, our lives are necessarily unpalatable to those whose lives have always been the default, right? It doesn't matter what we do or how we say it. Someone's going to be come to the page and be like, wow, what is this? Certainly there's different ways that nonfiction writers will mitigate that, whether by having like a historical through line, whether by having stories of other people. But sometimes it's just a straight up, here's the story of my life, or here's the story of a particular event, or here's the story of X, Y, or Z. And this is the truth. This is a truth. And that is as vital to share as and probably more than anything else that's been published.
Are there other folks who want to ask a question or comment? Yeah, Parisa.
Yes, thank you for this brilliant conversation. And it is kind of like a follow-up to the last conversation you had on the audience awareness somehow, but also to some of the questions you addressed first with if it's okay to call with your first names. So Adib, you talked about like how readers from different places, they see themselves in these characters, and how they kind of like they are you talked about how your like one's position in diaspora as being first generation, second, and so forth, kind of like shapes their way to write about culture, like in you brought the example about the English play. And also for Naseem, you mentioned your Iranian background, your parents, like growing up with that influence through them to represent Persians, Iranians. But also I'm curious now, like, how does your place in diaspora influence the way you kind of like push back against those stereotypes for quote unquote Middle Eastern people? And how do you navigate that? Like telling your own authentic story, but also challenging those narrow, reductive portrayals of Middle Eastern identities, considering that you are publishing in the West for Iranians, for whoever, immigrants, Americans, but still there is that, yeah, I hope it's making sense, my question. Yep, okay.
I'm currently reading a book that is relevant to this question. It's called To Save and to Destroy, Writing as an Other. It's by Viet Thanh Nguyen, who is a Vietnamese diasporic writer. It's brilliant. It's a collection of essays that he gave at Harvard. about writing as an other, and writing as a refugee, writing as someone from Vietnam who has, which has this fraught U.S. colonial history that's very recent, and larger colonial history, but besides that. And one of the things that has really been challenging to me in reading this is he talks about the traps that when you're writing as an other, you can fall into. Because you can fall into the infantilization trap of, well, I have to make all our people angelic because we have such a terrible representation. You can fall into the I'm not like everyone else in the community trap. And you can fall into a third trap that I'm currently forgetting, but was the one that really hit home. So maybe I'll remember it as I'm rambling. But one of the, I think a lot about the representations I put on the page. And part of his argument is that in order for us to truly accept our place as other and also complicate it is by having as rich and detailed stories as everyone else gets to tell, people who are in the dominance. But it's tricky when you take publication into account. This is the divide of what you write versus what you're able to publish, because publishing wants us to tell certain stories, and it can be hard to find the champions who are willing to not tell the, who are willing to take you on to tell different stories. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. There's what you can write and there's what you can publish. And I think I tend to come at it in a few ways all at once. One is that, as I mentioned, I'm a theater kid. I had no plan to be a career writer. I've had other careers before this. And I know that I can have other careers after this if this whole thing crashes and burns. And so again, a certain amount of not having fucks to give helps in this sense. I also think, I am white on my mom's side and Iranian on my dad's side. I was born and raised in the United States. And so the amount of otherness I experience will always be different from someone who's 100% phenotypically Iranian, or someone who is a first generation immigrant, or a zeroth generation, whatever. I don't know. I feel like first generation means two things depending who you ask,
I agree.
which is
I
very
identify
confusing.
as first generation, but a lot of people will tell me I'm
Right.
second, so it's a whole thing.
Right. And so sometimes all you can do is the best you can do. I think because I'm a theater kid, I tend to approach character in a very theater-given way, a theater-driven way of they're all humans, and I want to make interesting humans. And I think being Iranian is a really interesting way of being a human. And I think we all, as writers, we always choose which parts of ourselves to include, which parts of a character to include. We're always walking the line between the world as it is and the world as it can be. And we have to do the best we can. I think, in particular, of how privilege impacts my life, my work. I am a cisgender man, and even though I'm queer and brown, I do not visibly present as particularly queer or brown, depending on what I'm wearing on any given day and how much sun I've had on any given day. And I've also had a certain amount of success early on in my career. And so I will ask myself, how can I make room for more diasporic stories? If I told one kind of story that in some ways appeases whiteness, and I think it does, I don't think there's getting around that I wrote a character who's half Iranian and half white, and that appeals to a lot of people because then they have a way to get into that character. But also I am half Iranian and half white. That is the only life I've known. And I don't think there's anything wrong with leveraging that experience if it leads to collective liberation. And I think I think every time one of us puts out a book about Iranians, even if it falls into the infantilization trap, or whatever the second trap was, I've already forgotten it, and we still don't know what the mysterious third trap is. Every time we do that, we're still building a collection of diasporic literature. And the bigger the collection is, the more opportunities we have for more and different kinds. And maybe we won't be the ones to ever to achieve liberation for queer Iranian diaspora, but we are laying the foundations now. And I think that's worth celebrating, even if we will never, even if we will not live to see that work come to fruition. That does not mean the work is not valuable and necessary.
I
I
think
hope that
it's
wasn't really like self-congratulatory for all of us.
I think about the idea of what kinds of representations we have out, and the reality is just not much, especially because we are so often conflated with Arabs.
Yes, the
Which
number of
is
Happy Arab History Month posts I get tagged in,
no,
I'm like,
I see them all the time, and I'm like, he's not here. Like what? And it's not great for us. It's not great for them either, right? Because they're also getting conflated with us, and also the
yeah,
kind of myriad ways to be Arab. It's getting all
right.
clustered together. And if we can't separate out Iranian from Arab, we can't then separate out Iranian from Persianness, thinking about Persianate cultures, right? Like, when are we going to talk about Afghan cultures? When are we going to talk about Tajik cultures? And there's so many Persianate cultures that in Iran, my understanding is have been very ostracized, and a lot of Iranians are very very kind of Persian supremacy about it, but like Iranian Persian supremacy. We don't talk about the like myriad of ethnic groups in Iran, right? My mom's family is Lur, and this is like a part of history that I'm not gonna have, right? I'm never gonna understand like Malayer the way that she can speak it, and she can still speak it, and I think it's amazing. She doesn't have anyone left to speak it with, and she can still do it.
Wait, is your family from Malaga?
My mom's family is, yeah.
Same here.
Oh,
Sorry,
that's
go on.
amazing. That's
Not
amazing.
excited.
That's exciting. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that like it feels very rare to be able to get into the more of the intricacies, because any country is not gonna, it's not a uniform situation, right? And especially a country that was raised on empire. And I really hope that as time goes on, we just get messier and messier characters and more complicated. And that's something, Adib, I really admire about your work, particularly now your adult stuff, because it gets tricky when you write for kids, right? You have to really think about what kinds of messages you're putting on the page. But man, those queers are messy in your adult. I mean, they are so messy, and it makes them feel so alive, because I was like, I can hear this conversation. I can totally understand. It's part of it is generational. Part of it is that we're, like raised in America, and there is the accessibility to that and a certain messiness that comes with that. But, the like you just don't shy away from it. And I really, really admire that about your work.
Thank you. Um,
This is not a
I have no
return
idea.
compliment
No,
thing,
no,
so
I
don't worry
know. I
about
have no
that.
idea where that came from. No, I think it's really interesting. You mentioned that Iran is not a monolith. Yeah, like I'm always excited when I meet another Iranian, but I'm really excited if I meet someone else like who with origins in Yazd, where my family is from, um, because then we can go and make fun of the Rashtis over in the corner. Um, Apparently, I don't know why everyone in Yazd has a Rashti joke. It's like how everyone in Missouri has a joke about people in Kansas. Like, just gotta make fun of your neighbors. Um, yeah, no, I think that's so true. And yeah, like we will always be um, we'll always have to grapple with the fact that writing and publishing books exists at the intersection of art and capitalism. And until we get rid of capitalism, we just have to live with that and do the best we can.
Okay, I'm down for that. I don't know if it's gonna happen before I croak, but I hope so. We're
I always revisit
finding
Ursula K.
like
Le
a,
Guin's quote about how the
yeah,
divine right of kings also once seemed inevitable.
yeah. And we got somebody who thinks they are a king.
Oh, that's true. Yes. Everything old is new again.
Yeah. I'm gonna hijack the mic for a minute. Before I do that, though, I just want to make sure that if anybody wants to say something, offer a comment, this is a moment to do it. We're gonna close out at 6, and I want to leave a little time for the two folks to read before we close. Anybody else? Okay, this is a question partly as an older person, and I don't have any problem saying I'm older. In fact, I feel a certain ownership, not in a self-congratulatory way, but in a, thinking about beginnings, because I edited the first anthology of Iranian American writing in 1999 in the last century, and 2 anthologies since. And I'm aware that there are some writers in our community who have said that we're not supportive of each other enough. And I would disagree with that, because I feel like that's one of the things I have taken upon myself personally to do, both as a writer, but also as somebody who's thinking a little bit about, like, how does a community evolve and what does it entail to be responsible and attentive to one another. But I'm also aware that something happened recently at the AWP, and
Are you talking about the racism
Oh no.
on
Okay, I
on
definitely want to hear about
The
this.
Iranian fiction panel?
yeah, I wasn't
That's
there.
why I had. That's why I don't like all Iranian authors, just most Iranian authors.
But mostly what I want to say is, what does being supportive look like, and how can we do that for each other as writers? Especially something like Azin was talking about, like, there's enough angst about your own work, but then about how do you bring that work into the world, knowing that you're not going to be shot down or trashed or dismissed. So I'm just feeling out for you, what is the kind of support that you've gotten that has felt really visible and important been like, and how are you doing that in your own work as a writer who now is, both of you who are more established, doing that for other writers? Does that make sense?
It does. I think one, don't get on a stage and start spouting anti-Kurdish racism. That's a really silly thing to do. See me after class if you want to know more about that. I also wasn't there, but I had like an immediate after action report from someone who was like in the front row of the audience, and we had dinner together, and I was like, oh, I missed that. I think a certain amount of selflessness is required. There's a phrase that often comes up of sending the elevator back down. Like, once you get into a room, make space for others to join that room. I also think a rising tide lifts all ships, and so we should want more Iranians to be successful. And yes, some of them might be wildly successful while we can barely sell our next books, again, because of capitalism. I don't think we should stop trying to help each other, give advice, share warnings about people to avoid and things to avoid doing. Even just Iranian authors talking up younger Iranian author debuts matters. I was 7 books in to my career the first time I actually got to work with an Iranian illustrator for a cover. And that's because I kind of stuck it out and got to a point where I said I'd love it if the cover of my adult romance was illustrated by an Iranian American. And so we got one, Forzan Safari, who's done all sorts of amazing artwork, including the covers for my adult books. Also, you should check out her stuff. Like, she has amazing prints for sale. They're very queer, there are lots of feminist prints, and so part of it is leveraging whatever privilege you have in whatever way you can to get more Iranian Americans and more queer Iranian Americans more recognition. I think the other part of that is connecting our struggles to other similar struggles. We talked earlier about building coalitions. Naseem, you were just talking about how we're often conflated with Arabs. At the end of the day, the Arab community faces 95% of the same things we do. Like, the bombs fall the same, whichever side of the border they fall on, whichever kind of people they fall on. Celebrating our similarities while honoring our differences will help build those coalitions. And when we're in coalition, we find that we are stronger together than we are apart. And so I think we have to keep building for inclusive coalitions. I think I'm rambling now, so I'm going to turn it over to Nancy.
One of the things that I think a lot about is that the Black Panthers were so dangerous because they began to build coalitions with like poor Irish Americans in Chicago. I'm thinking of Chicago specifically, just because where I'm from. And I agree. Like, I love the how how did you phrase it? Celebrating the ways we're the same, but honoring our differences, or was it vice versa? I think that's beautiful. And I think that true liberation is only going to come with comparative solidarities and then working together, right? It's not just a matter of being like, we are similar. It's also, we are similar, so let's lift each other up. I think this panel is actually a really good example of being lifted up, because Adib reached out and said, hey, do you want to do this panel with me? And I was like, yes, please. Like, yes, I really appreciate that. And so I'm like piggybacking off of your fame. And my hope is that one day I can also do the same for another Iranian American or Iranian diaspora kind of more broadly. It's just that we know this country. That's what we are kind of equipped with. I have found that since the pandemic, I've been connected with more Iranian writers and many aspiring authors, and it's been so humbling to see the ways in which things we've come together. I think it's really beautiful, and I think the best thing that we can do is make space as soon as we get to where we are. There's always a little bit more wiggle room. My hope is for the Glades audiobook narrator that I can get an Iranian narrator. I did an interview with someone who is in college and they're an actor, working on acting, and said, oh, I'm interested in doing the audiobooks. And so I passed on her email to my editor, and I'm hoping to follow up. I hope something happens for that, right? Like I truly think that sometimes the least we can do is at least pass on an email or like drop a name, but hopefully, who knows, maybe one day we'll oh God, the thought of running our own publishing house is a lot, but there's so many authors who will use their success to have an imprint to then suddenly build out, or I work for a very, very tiny press that I volunteer at, and I'd love to do like kind of an Iranian focused thing if I can with us. So it's just a matter of making space where we can. And even if it's just a social media share or sending up an email, that's at least a place to start. It's not the place to end.
Okay, good. Thank you for both of you for responding to that, because it's very important to me. Okay, so I'm going to close by telling everybody that the center is closing at the end of June, but this recorded event will be on our archive, which will be housed at the University of Toronto, because I don't trust this country's archival practices. And also because the University of Toronto is very interested in supporting and developing an Iranian diaspora studies angle. So, and I really want to thank Adib especially, because he's been a dear friend to the center and to me personally. And you're right, he reached out to you, Naseem. So I'm going to ask you each to read a few minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes before we end. And thank you all for coming. So since Naseem started, Adib, I'm going to ask you to start the reading first.
Perfect. I'm going to read a selection from toward the end of my second novel, Darius the Great Deserves Better, but it seemed appropriate for Pride. This is when Darius is on a Zoom call with his grandmother back in Iran. Hi, Dariush John, Mamu said when I called. I miss you. I miss you too. How are you doing? Okay, a little sad. We lost our soccer game. It was playoffs. I'm sorry. I know you played your hardest. I quit my job too. Your mom told me. As if summoned, Mom appeared in my doorway. She hung back though. I said, and glanced to Mom and back at my screen. I talked to Sohrab. I'm so happy. Mamu's shoulders relaxed. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you, Maman. It's okay. I understand. Maybe he can come to Portland someday. That would be amazing. I cleared my throat. How are you doing? Mamu sighed. You know, every day is different. Sometimes sad, sometimes mad, sometimes I forget. Me too. Sometimes I think of something and turn to tell him, but he's not there. There were things I wanted to tell Babu too. It was too late for that. But I knew I had to tell Mamu. My sternum tightened. Mamu, can I tell you something? Of course, Dariush John. I'm gay. Eh? Gay? Mom stepped closer and rested her hand on my head. She played with my hair and said something in Farsi. I chewed on my lips and waited for the fallout. Oh, Mamu said, gay. I'm glad you told me, Maman, because I love all of you. My chest relaxed. I wanted to run around the room and laugh. Do you have a boyfriend, Maman? No, I said. We broke up. I'm sorry. You are the sweetest boy in the world, and so handsome. You will find someone. We talked for a little while longer, but eventually our conversation petered out, and we started to say goodbye. Okay, talk soon, Daryush. Give my love to your dad and Lale. I will. I love you, Maman. Shirinjan Khodafes. Khodafes, Maman. Mom said something else, something I didn't recognize. When Mamu's picture blinked out, Mom said, "That was very brave. I'm so proud of you." Thanks, Mom.
That was beautiful.
And thank you all.
In this, I'm gonna read from my short story and The White Guy Dies First, but instead of reading the first scene, which is depressing, I'm gonna read the final scene. And it follows, as we'll see, a non-binary but closeted non-binary Iranian American. And so this happens after the white guy dies. The figures at the glass door are familiar. Before Azad can attack with our shared body, my parents step in the room. My parents look from the monster I've become to the blood splattered everywhere, to the, I should say, warnings for some blood stuff, to the remains of James P. Hudson, PhD. Their brown faces pale into an unhealthy sheen. I completely forgot Baba said they'd pick me up. Are there expressions of shock and fear because of me? My mother swallows and steps forward. Fars? Her whisper is unsteady. My body contracts. My back rends itself as the spider legs retract. My legs shrivel until I'm just me again, normal Fars covered in blood. I can smell it on someone like someone smells dog shit or vomit on the carcass of the supervisor they just ate. I tremble. The transformation shredded my clothes. I stand naked before my parents, and that, more than anything, fills me with shame. Fars June, whispers my mother, her steps hesitant and careful as she moves toward me. She takes off her coat as she does, swallowing as she puts it over my shoulders without touching me. Azizam, what happened? Baba's lips move in what is probably quiet prayer as he looks up to the ceiling. I put on Maman's coat, and at the sound of the zipper closing, Baba drops his gaze to me. I can't tell if he looks afraid or disgusted, but he surprises me when he says, "You didn't pick up your phone again. We got worried." "We were supposed to make rishte polo and kufte qalqali." Maman sounds on the brink of tears, unsure and untethered. I did that to her. Me, her only kid, whom she and my dad have sacrificed so much for as immigrants. But carefully, so carefully, she brushes back a strand of my blood-matted hair. Are you okay? Am I okay? Inside me, Azad purrs and curls up like a cat, satiated. But is the danger gone? My mom keeps her attention on my face. My dad steps toward us, a paper towel in hand from the janitorial cart outside the door. She takes it without looking and begins to dab at my cheek. I want to explain, but my voice catches in my throat. How do I explain to my parents that I entered into a pact with a millennial-old spirit to transform into a monster and eat my racist colonizing professor boss? Baba brings the cart inside and lifts the mop from the grimy water from my earlier cleaning. He drops it onto the ground with a heavy thud. The blood, not yet settled, stains pink. He makes a wide berth around the corpse in the middle of the floor. I try to speak but fail. My mom licks her finger and smears it against my nose. Where's the bathroom? I numbly follow, half lead her downstairs, where she mosses my face. She gets a paper towel and another paper towel and another and rinses my hands, my arms, her coat, which she puts back on me once she's wiped. She doesn't bother with my legs. But when we're done, she takes more paper towels up to my father, whose bucket of dirty water is now a filthy gray brown. The results of what I've done bowled over me. I whimper, cover my mouth. My mother wraps her arms around me as Bubba chokes out, "God forgive me, but you're my child." I'm not, I blurt. It tumbles out of me and I let it free. I'm just your child. I'm transgender. I'm non-binary. I'm not a boy or a girl. I'm just me. Maman cradles me without fear or repulsion. We know. I stiffen, but she doesn't let go. We saw you researching it on the computer, but weren't sure how to talk to you about it. It's okay, Azizam. It's okay. My kin, Azad purrs, voice purrs. They accept you. Despite the tears streaming down my face, I smile.
Thank you both so much for this lovely afternoon and for your work, for your courage, and for helping us to learn more about people in our community that need to have a voice. So thank you, and happy Pride Month to everybody.
Happy
And
Pride.
Happy
Yeah.
Pride. And thank you, Percy John, for everything that you do. This was a very a particular treat for me.
Thank you. And take care. Thanks to everybody for coming. And if you're interested, next week we're going to have a conversation with another friend of the center. His name is Yashar Shayan, and we're going to try and be engaged with the idea of like how to build community after the center, how to use social media. He's kind of gonna take it on a little bit, but we'd love to have some ideas from all of you about how to sustain community in this pretty dark time. So it's going to be next Tuesday at 4 o'clock, right, Hesty and Nick? Next Tuesday, 4 o'clock. So if you're not doing anything, please join us. Okay? And you can find it on our Instagram. All right, everybody, take good care. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.